Well, good evening. Welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, Pastor Michelle. Today's Sunday, December 13th, and let's start out with our bold woman of the day, or for tonight. So it is Maya Angelou, which I love Maya Angelou. I quote her quite a bit. She's a poet and an activist. So she was known as a writer and a poet, but she was so much more. In her long life, she took on many roles. She was a filmmaker, a dancer, a singer, an actor, activist, editor, Grammy winner, cable car operator, playwright, author, and most of all, legend. Long before all her successes, she was just a little girl trying to find her voice. She was born Marguerite Annie Johnson. She spent much of her childhood living with her grandma in the small segregated town of Stamps, Arkansas. Her only companion was her brother, who gave her the nickname Maya. She had experienced abuse when she was 7. The fear and trauma it left behind were enough to convince her to never speak again. For 5 years, Maya never uttered a word to anyone, but during those years she read. She devoured every book in the black school library and every book she could get her hands on from the white school library. It wasn't until a childhood mentor challenged her, saying, "You don't really love poetry unless you speak it," that Maya spoke again. She was a master wordsmith who approached language with thoughtfulness and patience. Another challenge sparked her writing career. When her editor told her it's nearly impossible to write a lyrical autobiography, she went on to write her best-selling masterpiece, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, a lyrical and poetic telling of her childhood. In 1993, she became the first female poet to write and recite a poem for the presidential inauguration, which brought her poetry into the mainstream again. She did so much in her lifetime and inspired everyone around her. And one of my other favorites of hers is The Human Family. I've quoted that a lot in my sermons. So our Disney story tonight is Tinkerbell's Bedtime Story, and it comes to you from Peter Pan. Shove over. No, you shove over. The raccoon twins were at it again. Peter Pan knew the bickering wouldn't stop until one of the boys had pushed the other out of the hammock. "Say, Tink, how'd you like to be the new mother to all of us boys?" Peter said. Tink looked at Peter like he was crazy. "Oh, come on, you've seen the guys since Wendy left. They're fighting something awful, and they need someone to tuck them in at night and tell them a bedtime story." Tink was silent for a moment. "I guess I could ask Wendy to come back," Peter said, looking at Tinkerbell slyly. That did it. The last thing Tink wanted was for Wendy to return. "Tink is going to tell us a bedtime story," said Peter. The boy settled down. "Go ahead, Tink." Peter smiled. His plan was working perfectly. Tink sat down and crossed her arms over her chest. She began to jingle. "Once upon a time," Peter translated, "there was a beautiful fairy who, against her better judgment, lived with a pack of dirty, unruly, silly boys. And the dirtiest, unruliest, and silliest of them all was Peter Peter interrupted his translation. Tinkerbell jingled spitefully at him. "Okay, I know it's your story. Go ahead." So Tink continued and Peter translated. One day, as the lovely Tinkerbell was minding her own business, the very smelly and unpleasant Peter Pan, Tink, asked her to tell a bedtime story. Well, Tinkerbell didn't know any bedtime stories, so she went to fetch Captain Hook so that he could tell one. With that, Tinkerbell flew out the window. "Tink, Tink, come back." Tinkerbell returned and hovered in the window, jingling with laughter. "Well, that was a dirty trick, and besides, that's no way to tell a bedtime story." He sat down next to the boys. "You have to do it like Wendy did, like this." Now it was Tink's turn to smile, while Peter told a bedtime story and the lost boys drifted off to sleep. Tink curled up in her own little bed and closed her eyes. Her plan had worked perfectly. So, my friends, have a wonderful evening, and stay safe out there.